May 6, 1945. A dusty road in Czechoslovakia, just 1 kilometer outside the city of Pilsen. A column of American trucks grinds to a halt. Men lean against the steel, exhausted, listening to the static on their radios. The war is ending. The surrender documents are being signed. Yet, directly ahead, an SS Roadblock cuts the route, bristling with machine guns and a panzerfaust. 30 fanatics stand their ground, refusing to acknowledge that the clock has run out. They hold the road, they hold the objective, and they hold the fate of an entire company in their cold, desperate hands. Captain James Morningstar sits in his command vehicle, staring at the barricade. He knows that ordering his men to charge means killing them for a piece of ground that will be worthless by sunrise. He will be the man who decides if that last kilometer is worth a final sacrifice. This is the story of the Pawnee captain who claimed the final kilometer of a broken war without firing a single shot. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show the truth behind the myths of military glory. Captain James Morningstar was 30 years old, a man of Pawnee heritage, born and raised in Pawnee, Oklahoma. He led Alpha Company, a unit that had ground its way through the hedgerows of Normandy, held the line at the freezing, desperate bulge of the Ardennes, and crossed the Rhine under heavy fire. Morningstar carried the quiet, weathered patience of a soldier who had buried too many friends in foreign soil. He had seen the war strip away everything but the immediate necessity of the next few yards, yet he still held onto a stubborn, unshakable belief that a leader was responsible for the lives of his men until the very last second. Standing on the edge of that road, staring at the roadblock in the distance, he was haunted by the faces of his boys, men who had outrun death for 3 years and who now looked to him to make sure they did not perish for a point on a map that meant nothing in the shadow of total surrender. Opposing him stood SS Lieutenant Klaus von Richter, a 20-year-old fanatic whose eyes were as cold and dead as the ideology he served. Born into a family of minor Prussian nobility, von Richter had been raised on a diet of militaristic myth and racial supremacy, believing fervently that dying in the final hour was a higher calling than the humiliation of defeat. He wore a crisp, tailored uniform that stood in stark contrast to the filth-caked fatigue of the approaching Americans, and pinned to his chest was an iron cross, a symbol of his supposed valor. He viewed the war not as a failing political enterprise, but as a crucible that demanded the absolute sacrifice of his unit. As he paced behind his sandbagged machine gun nests, he preached to his teenagers and young men that they were the final shield of the Reich and that their duty was to hold the road to the last man, regardless of what the radio in Berlin whispered about peace. By early May 1945, the Third Reich was a shattered shell. Allied forces pressed from all sides, turning the map of Europe into a shrinking circle of ruin. Communication lines across the German army were completely severed. Orders from Berlin were ignored, misunderstood, or simply impossible to execute. In the confusion, small units were left abandoned on the roads, often without fuel, without resupply, and without any clear directive beyond the survival of their own localized bunkers. This chaos birthed a strange, dangerous window of time where soldiers were left to their own devices in the final, agonizing transition from total war to total defeat. In this vacuum of command, ideology became the only currency for many fanatics. Abandoned by their high command, these men clung to the absolute belief that their survival was an affront to their cause. Thousands of similar roadblocks and defensive pockets dotted the landscape of Central Europe. Most Allied commanders operated under strict rules of engagement, treating these holdouts as legitimate targets and clearing them with artillery and infantry assaults. It was a standard, grim progression that had defined the advance since Normandy. Other officers saw these final, isolated skirmishes as necessary work to secure the path forward. They did not pause to question the cost. They did not stop to consider if a bullet fired on the last day of the war carried the same weight as one fired in 1944. They pushed through, the logic of the mission overriding everything else. The road was the only way forward. Every mile secured was another step toward the end of the march. Morningstar stood on that road, the final kilometer stretching out before him like a scar. Morningstar climbed into his jeep, white flag flapping in the wind, and drove slowly toward the concrete dragon teeth blocking the road. He stopped 10 meters from the primary machine gun position. Von Richter stepped out from behind a pile of rubble, a Luger holstered at his hip, his face a mask of rigid, youthful indifference. Morningstar climbed out, keeping his hands empty and visible. He did not salute. He simply stood his ground on the cracked asphalt. "We are less than a kilometer from the city," Morningstar said, his voice level. "Your commanders have already surrendered. The radio reports are accurate. You have a chance to walk away from this fight and see your homes again." Von Richter took a step forward, his eyes scanning the road behind the American. "You are here to negotiate a retreat for your own men," he replied. "My orders are clear. This road remains closed. We are not interested in the lies of a collapsing front." Morningstar stepped closer. "Look at your men, Lieutenant. They are boys. They are holding weapons for a country that has effectively ceased to exist. If I order the artillery behind me to open fire, your position will be ash in 5 minutes. I do not want that. My men do not want that." The SS officer laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed off the nearby stone wall. "You talk of ash, yet you fear the consequences of the final blow. You are weak, Captain. You seek to save your own men because you lack the stomach for the final sacrifice. We do not surrender because we have a duty that transcends your temporary victory. This road is our grave, and we have chosen it." Morningstar kept his voice cold, steady, and devoid of heat. "There is no duty in senseless death," he said. "Your soldiers are waiting for a leader to tell them it is over. Give me the word. We will process you as prisoners. You will survive." Von Richter reached for the holster at his side, though he did not draw the weapon. "I will not have this conversation again," he stated. "You will turn your vehicles around, or you will find out exactly how much metal we have waiting for your infantry. I am an officer of the Reich. I do not take orders from an intruder on the last day of a dying world." Morningstar turned back to his jeep without another word. He realized the fanaticism was not a mask. It was a wall. He reached the radio inside his vehicle and transmitted the situation back to the battalion commander. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His command jeep skidded to a halt on the gravel, the 4 stars on his helmet catching the late afternoon light. He climbed out slowly, his movements deliberate and heavy with command, his ivory-handled revolvers resting prominently on his hips. The American soldiers parted instinctively, leaving a path for him to walk, while the SS platoon stiffened, their arrogance faltering in the sudden, suffocating pressure of his presence. He stopped 10 feet from Von Richter, his face a mask of iron, eyes scanning the roadblock with the cold, assessing focus of a man who had seen every form of human failure. Patton looked at the young lieutenant and asked, "Is this your barricade?" Von Richter straightened, trying to reclaim his composure, and replied that it was his defensive position. Patton leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly rasp that required everyone nearby to hold their breath. "Do you realize that in a few hours, the war you are fighting will be nothing but ink on a piece of paper?" Von Richter hesitated, his resolve wavering as he stared into eyes that had stared down armies. He finally answered that he was bound by the oath he had taken to his nation. Patton let a thin, humorless smile touch his lips before asking, "Is your nation still standing, or are you just guarding a pile of stones in the dirt?" Patton pulled his gloves off, finger by finger, and dropped them onto the hood of the jeep. He turned his gaze to the boys behind the barricade before fixing it back on the lieutenant. "You think this is valor. You think standing on a road in the middle of a forest and refusing to let a company of men pass makes you a soldier of honor. It does not. A soldier without a cause is a criminal, and a man who sacrifices his men for his own vanity is a coward. You talk about an oath. Your oath was to a government that has abandoned you, to a city that has fallen, and to an ideology that is already turning to dust. You are not protecting a nation. You are merely trying to justify your own existence by wasting the lives of those boys behind you. My captain here asked you for peace. He offered you a way out of this hell, and he did it because he values the lives of his men, more than the vanity of a final, meaningless scrap of earth. He has more honor in his silence than you have in that cross pinned to your chest. You have one choice. You can surrender your weapons now, march your men to the processing point, and hope for a shred of mercy in the aftermath. Or you can stand here and wait for my artillery to turn this road into a grave. You have 10 seconds to decide if you are a leader of men or just a fool who wants to die for a ghost. Von Richter stood frozen. His hand trembled near his holster. He looked at his own men, then at the wall of American steel behind Patton. Then finally at the general himself. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until the young officer's shoulders slumped. He signaled to his men to drop their weapons. The SS platoon moved to the side of the road, their weapons piled in a disorganized heap under the watchful eyes of Morningstar's men. Patton gestured toward the barricade, a single, sharp motion that summoned a heavy recovery vehicle from the rear of the column. The steel chain groaned as it attached to the massive concrete dragon teeth, the engine of the truck roaring to life. Patton stood still, watching as the vehicle lurched forward, dragging the jagged stones from the center of the road and dumping them into the ditch where the SS had dug their fighting positions. The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed through the valley, a raw, final punctuation to the obstruction. The SS prisoners stood in a line, watching the road they had defended being cleared in minutes. They smelled the sharp, acrid exhaust of the trucks and the damp earth being torn up by the treads. The American infantry marched past the abandoned, open trenches, eyes forward, refusing to offer a glance to the men who had threatened to turn the road into a graveyard. The roadblock was gone, the path was open, and the silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire that had threatened to erupt earlier that morning. Patton turned his back on the scene, climbed into his jeep, and drove toward the city, leaving the rubble behind. Captain James Morningstar returned to the quiet plains of Oklahoma shortly after the war ended, bearing the silent weight of a leader who had mastered the art of sparing lives. He spent his remaining years working as a rancher, known in Pawnee as a man of few words, who rarely spoke of his time in Europe, though he often sat on his porch, watching the sunset with a steady, peaceful gaze. He passed away in 1994, leaving behind a legacy defined not by the bullets he fired, but by the single decision that ensured his company walked home intact. Klaus von Richter faced a military tribunal in late 1945, where his fervent ideological commitment transformed into a bitter, lifelong resentment of the changing world. He served a 10-year sentence in a prison near Munich before being released into a Germany that had moved on from the fervor he once defended. He lived out his days in quiet, isolated obscurity, a relic of a collapsed hierarchy, eventually passing away in 1982. He remained unrepentant to the end, clinging to the fragments of his dead cause, while the world he once tried to rule continued to spin forward without him. General George S. Patton never spoke about the incident in his public journals or official briefings. He viewed the surrender at the roadblock as a tactical necessity and a simple matter of command. He did, however, keep the after-action report tucked inside a leather-bound folio in his private desk for the remainder of his life. He once wrote a single line in a personal letter referencing the event, noting that the most difficult battles are those where you must decide whether to save a man or to win a point. Some historians have argued that Patton's decision to negotiate with a fanatical enemy unit risked the established protocols of unconditional surrender and set a dangerous precedent for future engagements. Others have argued the opposite, praising the pragmatic mercy shown in the war's final hours as a testament to the general's ability to distinguish between necessary combat and avoidable slaughter. What is certain is that the road to Pilsen remained open, and the men of the Pawnee Captain's Company finished the war as living witnesses to a victory achieved through the courage of restraint. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have ordered a standard assault regardless of the hour? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the moments that forced people to face what they'd done, make sure to subscribe.